Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Edith Freed.
Lots of familiar faces. Woohoo! Welcome, welcome, welcome. As you join us, go ahead and use the chat and let us know where you are zooming from. Let us know where you are zooming in from. Pleasant Ridge, Cincinnati, Dayton.
All right. Los Angeles.
Los Angeles. Hey, hey, hey.
Right.
Irvine, Sand Lake,
New York,
Minneapolis, Youngstown. This is awesome. I miss New York.
Hi. I see Ginger Buck has a little one in the room. That's adorable. Well, this should be a fun conversation. Hey, mister.
Awesome, awesome. If you're just joining us, go ahead and use the chat to let us know where you are zooming in from. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
2 seconds, please.
We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. We're just giving people a chance to get in.
Here we go.
Cincinnati and Lebanon, Gulf Manor. It's awesome. Lots of Pleasant Ridge. We love Pleasant Ridge, where our church is located in Cincinnati. All right, Texas.
We got Texas in the house. I saw that.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be going to Austin next month, maybe, depending on the corona.
Oof. Stay in Ohio.
I know, right? New Lebanon. This is awesome.
Dixie, Sarah Bills, Rosie Z, Kevin F. Zella, what a great name. Oh, that's a great name.
Awesome. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started so that we can get into the presentation. I'm excited. So my name is Reverend Derek Terry. I'm the pastor of St. Peter's United Church of Christ in Pleasant Ridge, Cincinnati. And I'm so super excited to have today a great friend of Pleasant Ridge, a great friend of St. Peter's. That's Dr. Holly McGee, who's in the history department at the University of Cincinnati. We welcome Dr. McGee. So just a little background. I know we see lots of familiar faces, but if this is your first time here, we do this almost weekly, at least 3-4 times, or at least 2 or 3 times a month, where we talk about race. We have difficult conversations in a space where we can learn, where we can get it wrong, where we can bounce ideas and information and get the tools that we need to become and be and practice anti-racism in our day-to-day lives. I met Dr. McGee, 3 years ago, maybe?
I think so.
Yeah, at a class. She did a class where she compared, was it The Souls of Black Folk with the autobiography of Malcolm X, 2 books that I have read a million times and I never would have put together. But it was an awesome class. I think I was the oldest person in the class, which...
No, you weren't. I was.
Okay, but I was the oldest student in the class and I was like 33, like, oh my God, I'm the oldest? So yeah, that was my first time for that. But it was just awesome. And after that, I said, oh my God, you've got to come to my church. And she's been coming to the church every year since then. And so we're super excited that she's going to share a presentation with us. And at this time, I'll let her come and introduce herself and tell us what she's doing. Kate, our awesome person who helps us with the technology, she's hanging out in the background and she'll help facilitate. So thank you so much, Kate, and take it over, Dr. McGee.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much, Reverend Derek, for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to come and speak to you, you and your congregation. Y'all are just a fun fun group. So this is a lot of fun for me. I am going to take a lot of historical liberty today with our conversation, if you guys don't mind. And it is just that. It's more of a conversation as opposed to a lecture. I know I circulated a reading about a week ago. You were able to get a reading. And even if you didn't get a chance to make it through the entire reading, hopefully you had a chance to maybe skim over it or look over it, or even like just read a portion of it, because it will really kind of help to set us up where we're going today. And it is just a very relaxed conversation. And I love this, something that Derek just said, which was, this is a wonderful space to get it wrong. This is a wonderful space to get it wrong, to have questions, to have ideas, and to say, I just don't know. And so let me see a little bit about me before we get into the talk, because I'm sure that some of you might wonder who I am. I am an associate professor of U.S. history at the University of Cincinnati. I have specialty areas in African American history, South African history, and women's studies. I just published my first book. It came out last year. It's called, it's called Radical Anti-Apartheid Internationalism and Exile, The Long Life of Elizabeth Moffett King. And my book is actually being, it's about to be re-released on another press, Cynthia Press, and it's entitled, the re-release is being called One Day We Are Going Home. This is really awesome text about the first African woman who was banned by the apartheid government back in the 1950s, but that's a completely different story. So for today, what we are discussing is, I see that you all are having these conversations on race, and the title that Reverend Derek has given is Race, Rage, and Fear, and I love that. Race, rage, and fear, and because what we're really going to dig into today is ideas about race, where they came from, how power is shaped, how they were shaped, how they continue to be shaped, and what our role is in recognizing the shaping of these ideas and how we dismantle these ideas. And so if I may, I would love to ask if I can share my screen with everyone, because what I would like for us to do is, I've got a PowerPoint presentation, and it's not a formal presentation, but I do want to walk us through some ideas, some of the larger ideas. And sometimes it's a lot easier to see things. And so I'm thinking for maybe like the first 20 minutes or so, we can work our way through this interactive lecture, and then we can pull back from the lecture and open ourselves up to a larger conversation. Oh, thank you. Oh, Kate, look at you, Kate. Ooh, I'll tell you what, Reverend Derek, I don't know how much Kate is making, but Kate needs a raise. That's all I'm saying. So, all right. So let us get into the formal lecture. And let me see if I can figure out how to share my screen. May I ask Kate to share my screen?
Is it not letting you?
I do not see the thing that would say, share your screen, lady.
Bottom in the middle, it should be green, share screen in the toolbar, unless your toolbar moved its way up to the top in the Zoom window.
Oh, share screen.
There we go.
Thank you. I did click share screen, and I'm going to share it. Wonderful. I would love to imagine that everyone can see this.
We can see it. It's working.
Wonderful. Let me see if I can make it as presentation screen. Can you see that?
Yep, you got it.
Wonderful. Okay, then let's get into it, shall we? Okay, so I know that we have a formal title, Race, Rage, and Fear, but I really want us to think about larger words in a larger context, which is why I've kind of retooled the title of this. So really what we're going to be talking about today is ideas, race, and power, not just in the modern world, but in American history. How do these ideas about race and power play into the modern era where we are right now? And so one of the questions that I just want you to consider, something I want you to think about right now, go ahead and maybe write this question down, and we'll revisit this question at the very end of our conversation, at the end of the lecture. So this is just something I want you to think about. What is the essence of anti-Black racism in the United States today? Do you think that it's prejudice or ignorance? Okay, and here's what I want you to do. I want everybody who's listening, who's participating in this conversation, I want you to choose, what do you think is the essence of anti-Black racism in the United States today? Is it prejudice or is it ignorance? Now, don't get deep and mystical and wonderful and try to say, well, really, it's a combination of the two. It's more melding of, don't do that. Don't do that. I want you to pick. I want you to pick, and then I want you to set that aside. We're going to come back to that at the end of this conversation to see if you still feel the same way, okay? So one last time, what is the essence of anti-Black racism in the United States today? Prejudice or ignorance? All right, so let's jump into it. Okay, so, when we talk about race, when we talk about racism, these are, really scary words for a lot of people, right? Really dangerous words for a lot of people. When we talk about racism, particularly in the context of the United States, I'd like to know what are some of the most difficult aspects that you think, that those of you who are sitting in this conversation, what are some of the most difficult aspects of studying race and how it operates in the United States? And I want you to I really want everybody, I'm going to set my timer. I'm not even joking. I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes. And I just want you to think, in all of the times that you have ever had to have a conversation about race, had to, listen, that's a great verb, had to, or any time that you have had a conversation about race or racism in the United States, what were some of the most difficult parts of having that conversation? I'm going to set my clock for 2 minutes. I really want you to think about it, maybe take a few notes, and then we are going to come back together in 2 minutes and we're going to see what people say. And if you're sitting with somebody, feel free to talk to them about it, like what Martha's doing. I like what Martha's doing. All right, you got 1 minute left here. Wrapping it up in these last 15 seconds. All right, and there is our time. Okay, so in those 2 minutes, as I was scrolling through, I was looking at I was actually looking at some of your videos, seeing some of you, and I see some of you furiously writing. I see a couple of people chatting, and so I'm really interested to know. I would love for us to take about 4 or 5 volunteers, if there are 4, maybe 5 volunteers who would like to share what you've been discussing. What are some of the most difficult aspects of studying race and how it operates in the United States? And I'm wondering if Kate, can you unmute, or can I select to unmute, or how would you like to do that? Do you want to raise your hand if you would like to speak, and then I can unmute you?
Yeah, we can do either. I'll just name for folks who've been on these calls before. We are actually going to unmute people this time. We do want you to hear from you. So either put in the chat that you want us to call on you, raise your hand with the Zoom function if you know how to use that, or the reactions function. You can also use a thumbs up and we'll unmute you. It looks like Joy is likely ready. I see a raised hand.
Beautiful.
So Joy,
I'd love to take a question from Joy.
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me?
I sure can, Joy. Go for it.
Thank you. And I thanks for indulging me not putting on the video. I'm just getting home and it's stuff everywhere. So one thing that I would put forward is a very, very uncommon one that I think people make me feel uncomfortable for raising. And that aspect in particular is, as a Black woman who is literally, I don't know if victim is the right word, but I am a victim of circumstance wherein so many Black men are incarcerated and away. So many Black men opt to make relationships with people that are non-Black, being the two largest ones. And when this conversation has been raised, when I've been around people who will say, oh, what a bigoted thing for someone to think that people shouldn't be able to date outside of their race. And why would anyone be mad if he went white? Well, for me, there is a very legitimate reason. I'm not going to go into all of it, but to say that I feel very undervalued, and I feel like my opinion doesn't get to matter from people who would turn and point at me, from very white and privileged people who would turn and point at me and say, oh, how dare you? Dr. King says, blah, blah, blah. And you're being reversely bigoted. No,
Mhm.
you're not. And I'm saying that it's to me unfair that I don't get to put forth the very real reasons why I would bring that argument up, which is because at the end of the day, as Black women, many of us feel unheard, unprotected by our own men. So I hope that makes sense. I know it's a really broad way
No.
of putting it, but
No, it
I'm
makes
just saying that people don't even allow me to, or
right.
allow you to feel like you can put that forth as a legitimate concern.
Right. No. You know what? I'm glad that you brought this up. This is one of those difficult aspects, and this points directly to one of the things that we're about to get into. Everyone has a voice and an opinion in this conversation, and some of them are more personalized than others. And sometimes we are prohibited from bringing that personal nature into these conversations. Everything can't be deep, mystical, and wonderful and abstract. Some things really do affect us as individuals.
Yes, ma'am.
And so that is definitely one of those difficult aspects. Do we have another volunteer for another comment to put on the table?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I haven't seen anyone yet. I'm going to ask if any of the folks who put their thoughts in the chat, Stephanie or Billy or Beth.
Martha had her hand up.
Thank you.
She's on mute. There we go.
Okay. I'm here with Charlotte, and here is Charlotte. And so we discussed it, and I'll just tell you my part. I put it in the context of talking to a person who just recently, with all these events, has become aware of their own biases and all that. So I think in that situation, you have to be real careful when you talk about white privilege, because white people get real defensive. So that's the viewpoint that I was taking, that you just would have to be really careful and say, get a sense of what they've learned, what insights they already have, so you know where they are.
No, I really appreciate that. That's another. But listen, this is another very difficult aspect. It's a very mature aspect, but it's a difficult one in that it forces or compels those of us who are in the know to be patient, to be kind, to be understanding, to gauge someone else's feelings when really we just want them to get it, right? So this is, again, another one of those very difficult aspects. Is there anyone else who would like to share something? Thank you so much for that comment. Can I get one more? Yeah.
Charlotte had another viewpoint.
Oh, please.
Yeah. What I was thinking is, in my working career, I have worked with many nationalities and African Americans and so forth. And one of the things is that sometimes people don't want to acknowledge the difference in our heritage and our cultures and how we participate in things. And for some people, the whites think that people, when they celebrate and the African Americans celebrate, that they're just way too boisterous and, they just take over the whole program and whatever, and not understanding that joy is in many different forms. And so to be critical of that, I always found that very, very offensive.
Yeah. Thank you for that comment. As a matter of fact, Mark, we're going to be getting back to what you've just said in a little bit. It's a lot of, one of the most difficult aspects is perception, right? And that's really what you're discussing. It's perception. What we may perceive to be normal. One man's normal is another man's abnormal. One man's trash is another man's treasure, right? And so, but this is an incredibly important thing that you're bringing up, and this will come into play a little bit later. Thank you, ladies, for that. Can I get one more, perhaps one more comment before we move forward?
Mary has her hand up.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi. Yeah, it's funny. I just had a conversation today with someone, and it's someone that has a really unique perspective, and we were having a great conversation, and I was learning a lot of different why he thinks a certain way, and then we got to why people are how they're oppressed, and he couldn't understand. He could understand all these other issues like Black Lives Matter. He totally got it and understood it, but then when we came to oppression, he couldn't understand how people of color are more oppressed. He's like, there's all these organizations and there's all these ways to help.
Civil rights legislation.
I was just
they gotta make the most of it.
I just stood there like, oh my gosh, like how can you get it, but then not get it? And he wasn't mad or arguing. I'm just like, but I said, well, do you know what redlining is? I tried to give him some examples. He's like, no. I'm like, okay. And so I didn't, like you were saying earlier, I was just trying to be kind and push a little bit, but not enough to, and I said, okay, this will be a long conversation. This is not going to be solved in one day.
You know what, Mary, I cannot thank you enough, because this is the perfect segue into where we're heading. The absolute perfect segue. There's no such thing as a one-stop shop conversation that's going to key someone in to, you're not always going to get that aha moment. You can be as patient as you want sometimes. You can bang your head against that illogical door, but you can't necessarily write decades or generations of wrong in a 15, 20, God forbid, hour-long conversation, right? But it takes us to a really, really good place, because what that allows us to do is take a look at some of those contemporary difficulties that are associated with talking about that troubled past. And this is a lot of some of what you all have been saying. These are some of those difficulties, those many difficulties that we have talking about race, racism, particularly when it comes to Black-white relations in the United States. There's guilt, anger, and depression. When I have this conversation in my classrooms with my students, I used to teach at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and when I was there, my classes were like 98% white. There might be a Black kid in there. Well, here at UC, my classes are like 52% Black, and like maybe, a couple of international students and a handful of white kids. And it always happens like every year. They come to the African American history class, and like the Black kids, they're all booted up and angry. The white kids are kind of sitting there looking left and right, like they're guilty. And the international students don't know what to do, right? They're just kind of like in the back of the room, like hanging out, like whatever. But so this is part of that difficulty, that there's a lot of guilt, anger, depression that's embedded in this study of this history, because there's been a lack of dialogue. There's been a lack of dialogue. There's been a lack of teaching. There's been a lack of understanding. There's not been a lot of really good ownership of the dialogue. Language that we use. I hear people all the time stumbling between African American and Black, or, I had one young lady, I had a student, I'll take a very quick aside to tell this, when I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I had a young lady come to my office in tears one day. I don't know why I'm in trouble. My professor sent me this horrible email, and because I called students colored. She was asking me about colored students, and she couldn't understand why you can call people of color, but you can't say colored students. Like, you can't say colored people. She was like, it's basic grammar. And I was like, no, sweetie. She's like, well, I'm from northern Wisconsin and I know better, you know, because that's what everybody around me calls them. I mean, my granny calls them Nick. And she stopped herself in the moment. And I was like, yes. Granny calls them something different, but you may not. And so we had to have this whole conversation about outdated language from a racist era. And that made it very difficult for, you know, and that was a barrier for her. Language, exclusivity. Exclusivity is another difficulty to understanding the concept of race. You know, race is boiled down to two conversations in the broad scheme of American history. We talk about it in the context of slavery. We talk about it, you know, then a couple hundred years of silence and progress in America. And then we talk about the civil rights movement, and then blacks and whites shake hands and hold hands, sing Kumbaya because Barack Obama was elected president and we now live in a post-racial society. Well, that's a really exclusive and erroneous narrative of U.S. history, right? And then another thing that's another problem, pronouns, using those collective, personal, plural pronouns of we and us and them and they, those types of pronouns make it very difficult to get to a conversation with individuals. Whitewashing of history, whitewashing of narratives, what's important, what's not important, historical reduction. You know, that the notion that you could take all of African American history and boil it down to 1 month where we celebrate our athletes and entertainers. You know, historical reduction is an issue. That is a barrier. Curriculum neglect. Did you know that in the state of Ohio, the Ohio Department of Education has a curriculum standard for in high school, the way that students study race, they only start in 1877. 1877 is exactly, I see lots of eyes rolling. 1877 is supposedly Reconstruction, right? Reconstruction is, you know, like, oh, wow, it's a brand new day. It's emancipation. So it starts, you know, our children's knowledge of history, particularly race-based history, is started from a place of supposed freedom and equality. And if you begin the narrative telling people, well, everyone has been free and equal since the late 19th century, we just don't know why they can't get it together. It really kind of affects that narrative. And then there's a really narrow focus when it comes to race. There's a really narrow focus when it comes to race, but we are going to widen that focus. And what we're going to do is we're going to deal with the realm of facts, right? We're going to deal with the realm of facts. So is this a fact? Can we agree that this is a fact? What is a fact? A fact is something that we agree that is irrefutable. You cannot say, oh, well, you know, maybe 2 + 2 = 5 and certain, you know, in like a space-time continuum type place, you know, 2 + 2 = 4. We agree. Do we agree that people lie to avoid telling the truth? Can we all agree that this is a fact? It is a fact. People lie, whether you're a child, whether you're an adult, people lie to avoid telling the truth. We can agree. Okay, can we agree on this fact? Can we absolutely agree? Did you know that Africa is not a country? Did you know that African is not a language? Did you know that? Well, Africa is not a country. Indeed, it's not. And so what we're going to be looking at, is what I really want us to be able to focus on is the age of exploration. And that's really what this reading that you got has you focusing on. It's the age of exploration. We really want to trace a lot of these ideas, these difficult conversations back to a place. And what I want us to do is to trace this back to the age of exploration and colonization. Western European nations began expanding their empires and power during the 15th century. For those history buffs in the room, you know that it's Portuguese maritime technology that makes it possible for Europeans to begin penetrating the continent, particularly in West Africa. Portugal, Spain, the Netherlands, France, England, everybody. It starts out, you know, Portugal's big dog on top, and eventually England is going to be leading the slave trade, and they're colonizing and conquering Africa, Asia, the Americas. European nations were initially interested in trade routes through Africa to India, China, Japan, the East Indies. These are historical truths, correct? Like, I've not made any of these things up. You've learned these probably in your Western Civ classes, in your American history classes, but we're going to talk about some of the things that you don't know. Now, these are the things that we know now, right? And so what we're going to see, however, is that realm of ideas, in the absence of facts, that realm of ideas, particularly for European explorers, it becomes as if not more important than the facts themselves. And what's amazing is that these these outdated ideas that are eventually misproven, disproven, they still, are allowed to, and they do proliferate. And so we're going to talk about these ideas just a little bit. Okay. So the very first thing I want us to do is take a look at this. That initial English confrontation with Africans. Ideas that we have, a lot of these negative ideas that we have, or that English explorers and sailors and missionaries and all of these things, a lot of these negative ideas, they were really influenced by one of the most important developments in the Western intellectual tradition. Absolutely, the scientific revolution. Yeah, I tell my students all the time, it is too easy. You cannot just look at the 15th, 16th century and the slave trade and say, well, they were just racist. That's way too easy. They were just racist. They didn't have a context for this. Like, slavery had existed in the ancient world. Slavery has existed since the biblical times. Like, it just, so to say that, oh, that's just racist, that's just ridiculous. Slavery had a function. Like, the system of slavery, it absolutely had a function. When Europeans penetrated the western shores of Africa, slavery was a system in Africa. It existed. It was a trusted system. But what happens is that Europeans are penetrating the continent during this amazing time. It's an era of revolution. It's both religious, it's intellectual, and it's very observational, incredibly observational. And so, this revolution really influences the way that Europeans both perceived the world that they were in and how they disseminated that information about the world that they were in. And it was, when we read some of what I've sent you, it seems crazy, right? But this was an intellectual revolution for these individuals. This was the height of human knowledge at this time. And again, let's take a look at this, just understanding slavery, understanding Africa. Slavery and the slave trade had existed for thousands of years. Now, the one distinction that I do want to make when I say this is that, while slavery existed in Africa for thousands of years prior to European contact, it operated in a completely different way. Those of you who are interested in finding out the ways in which slavery was transformed from the African to the North American context, particularly the colonial North American context, there's a book called Transformations in Slavery. It's by a gentleman by the name of Paul Lovejoy. I would absolutely recommend that you check out that book if you're interested in seeing how slavery existed, operated rather in an African context, particularly in like an Islamic religious African context. Very, very different. So the idea that we have of slavery is, it's pretty crude compared to the type of slavery that existed in Africa. Did you know that in the context of African slavery, if you were a lot of times slavery was a way of extending kinship ties, or it was a way of extending kinship ties, because what could happen is that if you were a woman who was enslaved and you had a baby by your master, you could be freed through the birth of that child. So you could, but we didn't see that happening in the American context, right? If you were in the Islamic context, if you were a slave in Africa in the Islamic context and you began as an infidel, if you converted to Islam, if you accepted the one true God, then you could be freed as well. Well, we see that is not what happens in the American context either. Like Christianity is dangled like a carrot in front of slaves, and then like they bite the carrot and then they're beaten with a stick, right? Like, it doesn't matter, you're not going to get it, right? But so we need to understand that slavery in Africa existed in a completely different context. And so what we see though is that, with this particular piece from Paul Lovejoy, from Winthrop Jordan that we've read, is that in this initial English confrontation, this initial English contact with Africans, because it's not like they landed on the shores and they started beating people up and started chaining people. They really did kind of sat down, they looked around, and they were like, black people, who'd have thunk it? Like, I want you to imagine, if you can, try to imagine you have conquered the known world. You have conquered your borders, north, east, south, west. You have now conquered the high seas. You have figured out how not to get lost, or on the high seas, you've traveled for months at a time, weeks at a time to get somewhere. You land and Jesus, what do you see? What is that? I've never seen it. And like, this really is, and it sounds crazy, but they are attempting to order their world. Can you imagine? For the first time in your life, a couple of weeks ago, back in February, I spoke at a Montessori school over in the North Side, and I asked a group of sixth graders, what would you do one day if a bunch of purple aliens sat down, in your, in our city? What would you do? Would you be freaked out? How would you talk to them? How would you? And so they had all these crazy ideas about how they would get to know them or not get to know them. And all I could imagine, and all I kept trying to get them to imagine was that it's a way of you ordering your world. Yeah, it's a way of you trying to figure things out. And so when you see what they're doing, they're trying to figure out, how does black skin happen, right? How does black skin happen? What is this dark complexion that I see? The causes of complexion. I love this one, the causes of complexion. Defective religion. They're looking around at people and they're saying what they do or do not have. Defective religion. Savage behavior is something that they're seeing, or what they perceive, what a lot of these individuals would perceive as being savage. And this is one of my favorite stereotypes, apes of Africa, right? These great apes of Africa. I'm imagining these, and they say it in the piece that you're reading, these explorers, they look at these scantily clad women and they see their pendulous breasts. They look at these men with their prodigious lengths, and they can only imagine that these savage, apes of Africa, they must indeed enjoy procreating with the orangutans. And so this is not necessarily racist on their part. They are literally trying to figure things out. Libidinous men. Oh, imagine libidinous men, scantily clad African men, black from head to toe, with again these prodigious members, and the blackness within, right? And so the notion that the blackness of one's skin is reflected in the blackness of one's soul, right? The absence of religion, and so what we see, these really incredibly negative ideas, are just Europeans' way, the way of the Europeans of ordering their world. But here's the trick: Europeans, they're not the only ones with opinions regarding defective religion, savage behavior, and libidinous men. Oh, they're not the only ones. Now, unfortunately, they're the only ones for a couple hundred years, because it's not until the 18th century that you get this guy. I don't know if anybody knows who this is. His name is Olaudah Equiano. Olaudah Equiano, he is known as the father of the slave narrative in the modern world. He was the first African writer to enter the world of Western literary culture. And he wrote this, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano. And what's really cool about this, what's really great about this, is that Olaudah Equiano gives us our first historical account of slavery from the perspective of a child. He was a well-established young man. He was like 12, 13 years old. He was the son of a chief in Western Africa, someplace in Western Africa, and he was kidnapped. And so he was kidnapped, he was sold into slavery, and when he gained his freedom, he turned around and he wrote a book. He wrote a slave narrative, and this was, and for him, this was also, the term is a little early for him, but it was an abolitionist text as well, because he was attempting to convince Great Britain, thus the rest of the modern world, to end the practice of slavery, because he talks about how traumatic it was for him as a child to be caught into a net, to be marched to the shores, to be thrown into a boat, into a dark box with dying bodies. And it's a really horrible account of this young man, but it's the first time that you really get to see, what slavery looks like. And so Equiano was a member of the anti-slavery movement in the 1800s, or in the 1700s and the 18th century, and he worked to have English Parliament abolish the slave trade. He worked very hard to do this. And the thing with Equiano is that what he was able to do was he was able to broaden people's understanding of what Africa looked like, of what Africa was. Because prior to Equiano writing his narrative, people did believe that it was simply a labor source. It was a labor source of an empty labor source of generic Black bodies that could be taken at will. But here's something that we all need to understand. Africa is a huge and diverse land. It is not a country. It is a huge and diverse land. Look at this image. I want you to take a look at this image. People are like, how big is Africa? Look how big it is. This is the second largest continent on the face of the planet. Just under 12 million square miles. Look how big it is. It fits all of the United States. China, the UK, India, Europe, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, France, Spain. This is phenomenal. There are 54, well, okay, depending on how you count. If there are any Africanists in the room, I apologize, but depending on how you count, there's anywhere from 54 to 57 countries in independent countries in Africa. Things shift and change, I understand. Please do not be upset that I do not have an exact number, because things change in Africa a lot. There are currently, I'm gonna say 54 to be on the safe side, 54 independent countries on the continent, 2,000 to 3,000 languages. Think about this. There are 2,000 to 3,000 languages across this entire continent with only 4 major language families. 4. So basically, like if you speak Swahili, that's like the Spanish of Africa. You can get everywhere. Like you can get everywhere. Like somebody, like the root word might be right, the suffix is prefix, the verb might be, you're gonna figure your way out. But it's amazing. And scientists have concluded, here's something that's really amazing about Africa. Scientists have concluded that the origins of humanity lie in the savanna regions of Africa. Did you know that? And yeah, the origins of humanity lie in the savanna regions of Africa. Let's take a look at that, actually. And so this is important, right? Like this is important, the role of Africa. This is something that Winthrop Jordan, but this is something that those English explorers didn't know. They didn't know. They simply did not know. They're attempting to order their world. They simply got to the punch first, right? Any of you who are looking for books that kind of understand, that kind of explain Western civilization, the ascension of Western civilization and culture, you should check out Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel. That's a great book. Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Because otherwise, sometimes you look around and you're like, why is it white people have everything? Like everywhere you look. Like white people, like whether you're in South America or, whether you're in Africa or whether you're in Europe or whether you're like people who are fair skinned and light and white, they have things. And why is that? Well, Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond will explain that to you. So I would absolutely suggest that you check that out. But so those were things that they did not know. Here are things that we know now. The role of Africa in the evolution of modern humanity. So I remember when I was a little girl, you see this Newsweek cover over here on the right, The Search for Adam and Eve. I remember when this was published, they got a lot of hate mail at Newsweek. They got a lot of hate mail at Newsweek because nobody wanted to believe this. Nobody wanted to believe that the origins of humanity, well, because listen, for most of Americans like to identify as being Christian. And if you are a Christian, you love you some sweet baby Jesus. And sweet baby Jesus has blue eyes and long brown hair. Sweet baby Jesus is not from the savanna region of Africa, because that would make sweet baby Jesus sweet brown baby Jesus. And that would be a problem for people who have a lot of their ego tied up in the color of their skin. But paleoanthropologists have concluded that the origins of humanity do indeed lie in Africa. And in Africa, a couple thousand years ago, there weren't any Europeans. So let's see. So these ancient civilizations are incredibly controversial in contemporary scholarly arguments. Most specifically, you'll love this with relation to the country of Egypt. Egypt and like ancient Egypt is like a sore spot. Oh, it's a sore spot. And here's why. There's a race problem in Egypt. There's a race problem. I have Egyptian friends who it's half and half. Half of them are like, yes, I'm Egyptian. I am not African. I'm Egyptian. I am not African. Let's think about this. The race of the ancient Egyptians and the nature and the extent of their influence on later Western civilization has long been a source of controversy. It's been a source of controversy in the modern world. It's been a source of pride on the continent. But because again, who wants to imagine that contemporary religion, commerce, art that influenced both Greek and subsequent Western civilization originated with Africans? Who wants to believe that? And it's not until the 19th century. Look, Olaudah Equiano doesn't write the first slave narrative until the 18th century. That means that for how many thousands of years were people just listening to this bull? For how long? And even then, even when he writes this in the 19th century, African Americans and their white allies, they have to refute these claims just based on the humanity, because they're still lacking actual proof. actual proof and evidence, and those, because they were largely unaware, people were just unaware of the accomplishments of Western Africa. And, that evidence that they, and the evidence of Egyptians, and the evidence rather that Egyptians weren't Black, were used to counter these assertions that African Americans were capable of real civilization. So there's a problem. Like, we believe in Egyptian civilization, right? We believe in this, but we do not believe that Egyptians were Black. Because if Egyptians were Africans, then we have to rethink the way that we think of the legacy of religion, commerce, art, language that comes from those sources, right? And that can be very problematic for some people. But here's what I want us to do. I want us to very quickly understand West Africa just a little bit more. Very quickly, 16 countries make up West Africa. Roughly 16 countries. Like Africa as a whole, West Africa is physically, ethnically, and culturally diverse. For those of you who are interested in finding out just how diverse Western Africa is, there's a really great book that I would recommend. There's a book by a gentleman by the name of Michael Gomez, and it's called Exchanging Our Country Marks. It's Michael Gomez, and the name of the book is Exchanging Our Country Marks. Here is how diverse West Africa was. It was so diverse that eventually slaveholders in the Americas knew that there were slaves from particular regions who were already skilled in certain things. So the farm, like indigo, rice cultivation, tobacco, there were certain areas in Africa, in West Africa, where, slave traders would say, we need hands, we need work, we need labor from this place. And so, this incredibly diverse continent is something, this incredibly diverse region is something that was known by slave traders, which is really kind of phenomenal to me to think that, yes, I want to get slaves from Mali, or I must have slaves from Cote d'Ivoire because they know indigo. It's just amazing. And in West Africa, slaves cultivated crops and domesticated animals in 100 BCE, before the Common Era, and they enjoyed extensive trade that resulted in 3 great Western Sudanese empires. Just very quickly, I have to walk you through some ancient African empires. One of the first ancient African empires is that of ancient Ghana. Now, listen, this is important because when these explorers come to the continent, they come up with all of these crazy ideas because they cannot see what is there. This gets back to Mary's comment. It's all about like what they can see in their perspective. They cannot see superior weaponry. They cannot see trade and commerce. They cannot see the wealth of Ghanaian kings. They cannot see that there's this extensive, you see those red lines? Those are trade routes, silk, cotton, glass bead, horses, mirrors, pepper, gold, and slaves. It's really hard to know that an extensive trade route existed in an ancient empire and then still refer to those people as backward or that continent as benighted. After the ancient Ghanaian Empire, there's the Empire of Mali. Islamic Berbers engaged in political and economic competition. The Kingdom of Mali was socially, politically, and economically similar. I mean, this is amazing. They have got amazing kinship ties, amazing trade routes, a complex political system, and emperors in particular places are helping to create brand new states. You also have the Empire of Songhai. These are like the three of the biggest ancient West African empires. After the death of one of the leading emperors, Emperor Sundiata, they created and they captured and created a new trade city, Timbuktu. Who knew it was a real place? That was a place I used to just joke about when I was a kid. Like, oh, we live back in the back of beyond. We live in Timbuktu. It's a real place. And it was one of the largest of the Western Sudanese empires. Look at this. They were known in the ancient world for centralized empire administration. Think about this. There was a bureaucracy. Bureaucracies existed in Africa. They instituted taxation, a system of taxation and bureaucracy, and regulated trade. But these are things that for some odd reason, Europeans cannot see. They cannot see the culture, the religion, the art, the music, and the technology that is present on the continent. I think it's very important to understand that from the shores of Western Africa did not come the sickest, the worst, the weakest, those who had been defeated in battle. They took artisans, they took musicians, they took, the best of what, Western Africa had to offer in the form of cultural leaders, religious leaders, producers of art and music, innovators, technology. We have to really kind of reimagine West Africa. We have to understand that people lived in communities, that they had a form of religion. Sure, these religious Islamic and indigenous religions were not common, or rather were not known in the West, but that did not make them any less valid. Wood carving, sculpture, bronze, smelting, all of these things existed prior to Europeans making their way to the continent. But unfortunately, we're still left with these ideas. We're still left with these really negative ideas. And so what I want us to do is spend a little time talking about some of these ideas. Now, I'm sure that many of you have some very pointed comments about the readings that you've done, but I'm going to ask you to just bear with me for just a bit longer as we work our way through this. And so here's the question that I'm going to ask. There are 4 questions. So here are 4 questions. Here are 4 questions. 4 questions. How is it possible that many of the outdated and debunked ideas, you know what, let's go back. Let's not do those questions yet. Let's not do this. I take that back. I take it back. Let's go back here. I want to play here for a little bit. This is more fun for me, for just a little bit, for maybe 5-10 minutes. I want you to pull out your reading. Pull out your reading or refer to your reading. And I'm going to ask, before we get to those questions, what was one of the most surprising or disturbing things that you read from the reading that I circulated? Because I remember the first time I read this was back in grad school, over a decade ago. And when I read it, I was scandalized. I was in the library reading it looking over my shoulder, ooh, I hope somebody didn't see me read that word. Oh, they didn't see that. So I would love to know if you want to take a moment, if you want to maybe I'll do this. How about we take 2 minutes? We'll take 2 minutes and I'll let you pull up your reading. And then maybe you can flip through it. And if there's one particular part where you had a particular question, or I would just love to know what your reactions are. What's the most surprising thing that you read in that piece? And I'm going to set the clock for 2 minutes. If you want to get up and move around, go grab something to drink, go use the bathroom. You got some time. Think about it for a second. Okay, in the minute that you have left, as you're still writing, please continue to write. I'm going to start us off with one of my favorite things from this incredibly problematic piece of reading. So one of my favorite parts was when they are, when they're describing those first Europeans who see Black people and they're like, whoa, they are super Black. I wonder why they're Black. Oh, wait, I know. It's the heat. It's the heat that makes them so Black. So what they did was they take this guy from Africa. Imagine they take a man from Africa. They ship him all the way back to the UK. They put him in a cold, drafty, wet room and they watch him for a year. And they say to themselves, he didn't get any lighter. If this is not the height of pseudoscience, it's laughable now, right? It's hilarious now. But at the time, they really were attempting to, this is science. You have a hypothesis. You test it, right? So you take one African back to Europe and you watch him, and then you look at the other Africans in Africa and see what happens. I was just blown away. And I would love to hear, if any of you would love to share, what are some of the things that you read that maybe kind of struck you with this particular piece? Anyone? Do we have any volunteers?
Oh, we're really getting the hang of the raise hand thing. You can try that or type in the chat that you want to share and we will unmute you. Or if you're on video, you can wave at us. That works.
Can the question be posed one more time?
Sure. I just wanted to know from the reading that I circulated, it's really an open question. So I'm willing to take a reaction. What was something that really surprised you? What was something that disturbed you? What was something that was a new piece of information for you? So I'm willing to take any of those in a reaction. And I see a hand. I see Diana. It looks like Diana Hewell.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
I surely can.
I'm not very good at this yet. So I didn't get to read the article, but I hope to read it. But
okay, great.
It was something you said earlier, which was that the men procreated with the apes of Africa. I never heard anything like that. I mean, is that something that they really thought?
Oh, this is something that English, well, it wasn't that the men procreated. They specifically said that these libidinous, it was libidinous men, but it was aimed at African women. So when you read the article, you'll actually see in there that they say that these women, well, because they see these, listen, these European explorers, they get off of these ships. There are no women on these ships. They get off of these ships after being at sea for weeks, and they see half-naked, bare-breasted, dark, black-skinned women, and they come up with all these crazy ideas. And they can only imagine, and they actually say it in the article, that like they speculate that these women can only be satisfied by having sex with orangutans. And this begins, but this, listen, if you can, what would be the purpose? I'll ask someone else. I'll ask everyone else. What do you think would be the purpose of putting this idea out into the ether? Anyone? Why would someone suggest? Is there any benefit in espousing this idea? Anyone? I see Joyce got a hand up. Was that Preston?
Yes. From my studies, there were the benefits that came from some of these racial ideals, just like some of the other sciences and other discoveries that were found to be not true. Some of those were actually based on ego, people wanting to represent that they had more knowledge than others, or were directly trying to inform their culture as to what they were observing. And then there is another aspect which some people will do, just like you can see of the manipulation of certain people's minds when it comes to cults. But it was also an ideology so that to establish control. Meaning that if you wanted to keep people within your cultural confines and following your way of doing things, whether that's religion, how you run the home, how you raise a family, so on and so forth, or view the world, that they wanted to keep a confine on that. So in order to keep that position of their previous knowledge, it's just like how people hear about new religions. It was automatically rejected, and because of fear, the negative connotations were attached to it to keep people apart. And also to justify the immoral use of human bondage.
There you go, Preston. And it's power and it's justification. Particularly, it's justification for the misuse and exploitation, which you'll eventually see, of the Black female body. If any of you are interested in learning a little bit more about the ways in which African female slaves were sexually exploited, I would absolutely recommend that you check out a book called The Peculiar consonant clusters always get me. The Peculiar Institution. The Peculiar Institution by Kenneth Stamp is his name. Kenneth Stamp, and specifically, I'm going to refer you to chapter 9 of this book, and he talks about the average birth rate of enslaved women. Because if you can if you can convince people that an entire race of women has sex with animals, well, there's nothing that you can't do to those women. There's nothing that you won't accept being done to those women. And in Kenneth Stant's Peculiar Institution, what he shows is that the negative cultural patterns around the ideas of Black women led to them being bred in slavery. Did you know that the average enslaved woman had 9 children in her lifetime? The average had 9. Some had more, some had less, but the average was 9. And these were not children of loving marriages. These were largely products of rape. And so this has to go back to, why. And I'd love to go back to Joy. I know that Joy had her hand up earlier. Joy, if you are still interested, I would love to get your comment. If I can see Joy. I don't see Joy.
No, I still was running around, so I still don't have it on the video on. No, he answered it perfectly. Basically, he said, and then what you rolled in and said was exactly the same kind of line of thinking. Yes.
Yeah. Anyone else like to put some comments on the ground? Yes. Okay, well then let's do this. Let's go ahead and move forward. So this is really the last thing that I wanted to leave us with. The last thing I wanted to leave us with was a conversation, was an opportunity to have a conversation about these ideas, And so here are a couple of questions. And you are welcome to take up, as a group, we can take up one at a time, or we can jump around. It really is up to everyone. How is it possible that many of the outdated and debunked ideas of 16th century explorers still seem to influence contemporary society? How are these ideas being passed to younger generations? Is it happening directly or indirectly? How do we dismantle negative constellations of ideas? How do we get rid of these ideas? And then we'll get back to the question, what is the essence of anti-Black racism? As a matter of fact, let's do this. I would love to take a poll. If everyone has access to their comments, I would love for you to just type in one word and answer, what is the essence of anti-Black racism in the United States today? Type in either prejudice or ignorance. I would love to take a poll. Kate, I'm going to ask what you see more of. I see you grinning because I can't see the comments. Do you see more prejudice or ignorance?
I was thinking, I wish I had been tallying. It's looking about even. I will count them up while you're continuing.
Okay, so then I'll say this. So it looks like it's about even. I'm going to ask for comments from 2 people. I would like to hear from 2 people who say it's prejudice, 2 people who say it's ignorance, and I'm going to ask to hear from voices that we haven't heard from yet this evening. So for those of you who said it's prejudice, and
say there are a lot more ignorant.
Oh,
maybe about 50% more, and fewer prejudice.
Why fewer prejudice? Okay, then then we'll start with ignorance. I love it. We'll start with the winners. Okay. So for 2, I'd like to hear for 2 people. What is the essence of anti-Black racism in the United States? You say ignorance. I say why. Please do explain it to us. Go for it. I see Sarah Billis. Is it Sarah Bills? Go for it, Sarah. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I want to unmute you. Unmute Sarah. There, yes.
There we go. So I would say I said ignorance, but that's a really hard, it's hard to pick one of those. Because at this point, especially today, I feel like it's very willful. I feel like all the information is out there and all you have to do is 10 seconds of work. And so, I mean, willful ignorance to me also feels like you've kind of decided that a certain group of people and a certain kind of history isn't worth taking the time to understand. It's like there's no value. I don't know. So, I mean, it's just, I see so many people that just are so, the judgments are coming out of their mouth, but they have taken no time, no effort to learn anything, to walk a moment in someone else's shoes, to see the history, to see the process, to see how we got to where we are and where do we want to go and all that kind of stuff. And it just, to me, it's just kind of astounding. So I find it really hard to separate the ignorance from the prejudice. But I don't know, it almost, yeah, it's hard for me, but I kind of went with ignorance on that one.
I like that. I'm gonna push you a little bit, Sarah. Can I ask you a question? Okay. So you make a really great point. You say it's ignorance. There's so much information out there. People just haven't taken the time to learn. Okay. I'm gonna play devil's advocate here for that person, for these people who you feel are willfully ignorant. Is it really their fault that they haven't learned this information? And I ask because we can all think of our own high school experience. We can all think of our own college experience. We can all think of required classes that we had to take. And then we can all remember those things that were quote unquote electives. Where is the responsibility of teaching this comprehensive history on the part of state or national authorities? Like, do they have a responsibility to create informed citizens? Is it really this individual's fault, or have they largely been failed by the society in which we live?
I think it's both.
Okay.
I think the reason I say that is because I think obviously when children are young, the burden falls on parents and educators to guide them, in society, to guide them in a certain way. By the time I was in college, I was taking classes like the Black Church in America and Malcolm and Martin in America by choice. It was then my responsibility. It was my responsibility because I was old enough to make choices. For children, obviously, no, I feel like the burden of educating my children doesn't fall on them. It falls on me.
Okay. No, I like that. Okay, so thank you, Sarah. Thank you for letting me push you a little bit on that. And then I'd love to hear there's another person. I'd like to hear from another person who chose ignorance as the essence of anti-Black racism. And I love how, go ahead, Elaine. Who's that, Elaine?
Sorry, Elaine? No, you're fine. Yeah. Hi. I agree with Sarah, and I really like the point that she made that with all the information out there, you choose not to get the information now. And I totally agree with that. But she does point to one thing that I said when your first question, what's the most difficult thing about talking about race today? And I said, having folks think outside their own point of influence. And that it goes to that. And even though the education is there, and, I thought, yes, I read Malcolm X in high school and, and it was required reading in my history class and all that, but we didn't learn about the riots in the early 1920s in Tulsa and in Chicago. Wow. And it's like, wow. And, how did we not know that? And so when I talk to people today, if they don't know about, my case for reparations is the redlining and why whites are so economically prospered, and just thinking about, and this goes back to your own influence, why I was never pulled over for having a taillight out because I'm white and my next door neighbor was. They don't, so it's kind of both, but it's the ignorance that we have not done, and I was a teacher, the best job with all the history that we could have.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I really do appreciate that, Elaine. That is something that I struggle with my students. Every year, my class, unfortunately, is not a required course. My course is considered a BOK, breadth of knowledge fulfillment. So if you want that diversity and inclusion check mark on your transcript, you go sit in Dr. McGee's class. But one of the things that I get, even though the class is filled with a bunch of people who are choosing to be there as opposed to being required to be there, there's always some level of resistance first, then anger. There's resistance because I am still using the same US narrative, but it's from a different perspective. And that perspective is not, we came, we saw, and we wonderfully conquered. It is, we came, we screwed some people up. We stole, we took, and we continue to. And that's a very difficult thing for people to have to learn. A lot of my students for the very first time, I have students who for the very first time, they are learning about something called lynching. It was amazing to me. I know for people who are on this call, it might seem fantastical, but 2-3 years ago, I took a group of students to the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC, and I was walking through the museum with students and had one student, a young Black male, he stopped and he was like, Dr. McGee, what is this? And it was an installation on lynching that was leading up to Emmett Till. And he had never heard of lynching before. Like, this is the whitewashing of our history. You really cannot understand systemic violence against Black bodies in the United States today, unless, and why it's so important that we have federal anti-lynching legislation, which we still don't have. It's so important to understand. You can't really understand it without the history. But when you remove the history, it takes away the context and it leaves people in a contemporary place saying, why in the hell are we still doing this? Like, what? This makes no sense. These acts make no sense. It's because they are, because of the way that they're founded. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you for that. Okay, and so we still have some time, and I would love to hear I still have time to hear from two prejudiced people. So people say, what is the essence of anti-Black racism in the United States today? And we have two, and I'd love to get two volunteers who say why they think prejudice is the answer.
If nobody else, okay, I've already spoken, so I didn't want to.
Please, no, go for it. Yeah.
I feel like it's their inherent prejudice that allowed them to think I'm better, that allowed them to be ignorant. So because if you're not inherently prejudiced, you're not going to think those things about somebody else. Like, oh, they must have come from an ape. Like, they were inherently prejudiced, so those kinds of ideas came forward. Whereas anybody else might think from a different perspective, like there's another reason why they were that way. Or maybe it's just because of their minds were not that well developed back then or something. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Well, it does, but the question is more for the contemporary context. So, what is the essence of anti-Black racism today? And so if it is prejudice, anti-Black racism, if you feel that that's it, I would love for you to direct your comment more towards the contemporary era.
Okay, so I think some of that is still true because that's what's keeping them ignorant is their prejudice. Mm-hmm. So they're just, so it's kind of, it goes both ways. Like, and I've learned so much, like how we got here recently, like that I had no idea. Like all this history, like we were talking about, all this history. I've heard that preachers were paid right around the New Deal era to teach capitalism. Basically, they were taught to say, if you are wealthy, you're going to heaven, and if you're poor, you're going to hell. And that's how we got these false narratives around poverty. And it's because they always want to be better. So it's like there's all these things in place to keep them locked into their prejudice, almost to keep them wanting to feel ignorant, and because that's a safe place, because that's what they've been raised on, and now and you pull that one little thread, and I'm sure you've seen that with your students, and it's scary. That's a scary place to be.
It can all absolutely unravel. It can all absolutely unravel. Thank you for pointing that out. That. And it really is, to a certain extent. Okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate again. I have a lot of patience with and understanding for white supremacists in America. And I know that that sounds like a crazy thing for me to say, but I want you to understand why I say this. Look, Sarah's like, I don't. Nope. I love it. Sarah's like, nope. Cancel. But listen, so this is why I have a lot of understanding for and a lot of patience with. By and large, white supremacists in America have been sold a historical bill of goods. I feel for them. I really do. Imagine this. You have been watching your great grandfather play this game, and he's won. He's winning. Great grandfather won. Great grandfather won. Great grandfather. Great daddy won. And now it's your turn to sit at the top of the pile. It's your turn. You've earned it. Why? You've earned it by virtue of your whiteness. You have earned it. It's your turn to sit at the top of every hierarchy there is. You know, political, educational, social. It's your turn to sit at the top. But here come 3/4 of the world's population saying, Here come the brown people talking about their rights, talking about what they want. Dadgummit, it's my turn. Like, imagine that. It's my turn. They've been sold a bill of goods. You know, we've got American presidents who have said, and look, we can't just vilify the one currently in office. Hundreds, not hundreds, let me say dozens of American presidents have used race and race hatred as a way of undergirding their administrations. From Thomas Jefferson to Garfield to, oh my goodness, there's some really great ones. Andrew, don't get me started on Andrew Jackson. Don't get me started, Johnson. Oh my God, like, right? So like there's one, who is it? There's one particular president, he said, this is a white man's country and we intend to rule it. Yeah.
Wallace?
Sorry?
Wallace? Was he a president? I can't remember.
No. No, he was just a contemptible character. He was just another contemptible character. But there's an idea. There has been an idea that has been undergirded in the fabric of American history that this is a white man's country and they intend to rule it. And white supremacists today, they've been sold a bill of goods. It's their turn and they don't get their turn. And this is a very difficult and hard moment for them. And so while Sarah might not have any compassion for that standpoint or patience for it, I certainly do. Sarah, do you want to defend yourself for 2 seconds?
You actually took my gesture the wrong way.
I apologize.
I actually agree with you.
Oh, okay.
You know, and I do, because I read Rising Out of Hatred about Derek Black, and that was amazing. I agree with you. There is such a level of brainwashing and, I mean, just this isolated, insular, you know, I mean, how are you supposed to fight against something as a child that you are been steeped in from the womb?
Exactly.
I mean, it's, and I mean, those people that had these conversations with him that had every right to fear for their lives while they were near him, are heroes. I mean, they're just amazing. No, his story, I have to say, I mean, reading about white supremacists is not like everyone's favorite pastime, right? But like, I really suggest this book because
I'm here for it.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I was agreeing with you.
Okay. Okay. Good.
That's so funny.
That
Is it possible? Oh, sorry. Go. Was that you, Reverend Derek?
I was going to say I have that issue in church when we started doing these conversations. I mean, you've been to my church. It's very mixed. Young, old, white, black, gay, straight, and some of my older, usually white members, who were indoctrinated to have this idealistic view of our country. This brand of patriotism that, you know, everything America does is great, it is noble, beautiful. And their first black openly queer pastor comes and pushes back on that narrative from experiences that they've never dealt with. Like they, you know, And these are hardworking, salt of the earth people who don't consider themselves wealthy. But from my perspective, if you buy a brand new car, you pay cash. I'm like, nobody in my family could do that, right?
Right.
And so it's very different. And it took, for the first 3 or 4 years that I was there, I didn't do anything other than follow. Like, you would come in, you wouldn't know there was any difference in me being a white pastor or a black pastor. It was just very much follow the rules, do what you're supposed to do, head down. And then with the election of Trump came the boldness of, well, we have to talk about race. We have to talk about people's experiences other than our own. And I agree with you. I feel very sorry for people who have this idealized view, because now everything that you're looking at is pushing back on that. And, they looked at white Jesus in our sanctuary for 145 years. And I'm saying eventually we're going to recolor him. That's tough for people.
It's hard.
I'm changing Jesus.
Like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're just showing his real face.
Right. Jesus is always like, how can you take away my Jesus? It's like, no, like, we want it to be authentic.
That's great.
And all the saints, you have to recolor all the saints too.
Oh, you have to recolor all the saints too?
Yeah, everyone, yeah.
Because if you think that Silas and Paul were not praying those bars open black, if that is not two black men praying bars open, I don't know who is. I love it. I love it. Yeah, but I love this conversation, and there's no right answer. Like, I literally gave you these two tough choices because there's no right answer. It's a combination of both, right? It's prejudice, it's ignorance, and it's not just like you're so stupid. It's just there's information out there, and it's too easy to get to. You can't. We no longer live in an era when you can say, I didn't know that, I didn't see that. Now everybody has a smartphone. People whip out those phones. And like, I saw one video, young man, he pulled out a phone. He had followed some woman that cut him off on the freeway and had shouted racial slurs at him. He followed her. He picked his phone up and he said, Karen. And he started calling her Karen. And she started screaming, no, not Karen. No. You can't hide. You just can't hide from the information, from your actions, from your misdeeds. You really can't hide anymore. And this puts us in a very difficult place. It puts society in a very difficult place. It puts, people who have been able to hide, behind a mask, behind a hood, behind a council, behind, a gated community. It puts them on the front line. It does. It puts them and their beliefs on the front line. And it's very hard to tell somebody everything that you grew up at the knee of your grandmother or grandfather believing was wrong. Granny was wrong. Grandpa was wrong. Matter of fact, not only was Grandpa wrong, he was probably a racist. And you don't want to hear that because you love your granddaddy. We all love them, right? And but at a certain point, you have to recognize that we live in a different era. And so we're going to finish up with these last 3 questions. How is it possible? How is it possible that many of the outdated and debunked ideas of the 16th century are still influential in contemporary society? How in the world are these ideas being passed to younger generations? And then finally, how does everyone involved in this conversation, how do we begin to dismantle that negative constellation of ideas? And we can take up any 3 of the questions. I'd love to hear from anyone. Is this?
Looks like Preston may have unmuted himself. Preston, your audio feed is breaking up. We can't hear you. It might be a connection issue.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. That's better, yes.
Yes, so, yeah, in my travels around the country several years back, I felt like I had a calling to go out to the hills of Appalachia. I left without my family, none of my friends, and my family thought I was crazy. Like, you're not going to make it back.
Yes.
Literally in the hills, no running water. We had to, heat the home with firewood. And it gave me a different perspective because my family's from the Caribbean. And for one of my first times outside of maybe seeing assumed poverty, like people living in trailer parks or things like that. I had never seen such a vast area of poverty. And when I looked at history, I understood the racial a little bit.
Preston, you're really breaking up, dear. Oh no, I think we might have lost him. Oh, Preston, no, he was going someplace great with that. Well, can we potentially? Preston, I'm so sorry. We're gonna mute you. I'm so sorry, Preston. He's broken up too much for me to really hear him.
I can't even mute him. I think his connection's too unstable, but that's okay.
Oh.
He probably dropped off. He'll come back.
Okay. Would anyone else like to
I
address one of
see
these
Elaine
questions?
raising her hand. Is there anyone who didn't get a chance to speak yet who wanted to? I see Ginger. I'm unmuting Ginger. Gingerbach.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I apologize. You are going to hear young children in the background because they're out of control. But as far as the passing the ideas down to younger generations, I really do think it's a combination of both. Unless parents and or grandparents or teachers are very intentional about teaching their children to be anti-racist, they are going to grow up with certain ideas because you can't help but see racist ideas, whether they're overtly racist or not, in the media, on their streets, in their schools, wherever they go. So I definitely think it's a combination of the two. And, you know, as a white parent of white children, I try very hard to make sure that I am teaching my children to be anti-racist, but I'm going to screw up too. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. So it takes a ongoing effort.
No, you are 100% right. That word that you used, Ginger, was so important. Intentional. The intentionality behind the things that we do, because you're right. You know, racist ideas are embedded and coded into almost every facet of our lives. You know, you were naming places. You know, one of the places that you left off, which I love because I get to say it, the grocery store. The grocery store. Think about commercials that you watch. You know, I had a really, you know, I had a Facebook battle with a friend of mine from high school who couldn't understand why, Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben were racist, product carriers. Like they didn't understand how this is just adding adding fuel to the fire. They're like, but I like pancakes. She's like, I love pancakes. I love rice. Like, you just don't get it. Like, but you're absolutely right, because if you are not, I love how when things happen in the media, we're seeing this happen a lot. Things are happening in the media. There was this case where this couple went to this white couple went to an 8-year-old Black boy's birthday party, and they were flying the Confederate flag. They were waving it, and they were shouting, like, you're gonna burn, and like they're shouting. These kids are crying at the birthday party. The two white individuals, they were arrested. You can look this up online. They were arrested, and then when they were sentenced, they had to serve jail time. The girl started crying, and she was like, that's not who I am. I wasn't raised like that. And that's a lie, because here's the truth. And Ginger just pointed this out. If you do not teach your children not to engage in that behavior, it is the same as telling them that they can. When you do not tell your sons that little girls' bodies were not made to be played with, it's like you're telling them that it is. So if you do not teach your children to be anti-racist, you can't just imagine that these good souls are going to be somehow impervious to those negative images that are constantly bouncing off of them 20 times a day. So thank you, Ginger. You're right. It's intentional intent. Anyone else? Do we have any other comments?
I think Preston is back.
Preston!
And if Preston's unable, I'll try to unmute Preston. If Preston's unable to speak, I do see one hand up.
I'm still here.
Good. Oh, good. You got cut off. Can you start over? I'm sorry. No.
Okay, so what I was saying, I guess to touch on those two subjects, and also to piggyback off what the last lady had said, effort. our society does have a lot of blatant and inconspicuous racial things that have just been accepted as commonplace. Even so much that, as you see, so many people are even blinded by it because the norms of the behavior have been accepted, and that's on both sides of the issue. You know, there was a time where people accepted the N-word as a way of being referenced, and then started utilizing that as a way to describe themselves. But it's definitely been a taught thing. There are very few people that I've met that have had a traumatic experience that has caused them to have a complete racial overview. Most of the people that I have met that had racial prejudice or even up to the point of hate, they had all been taught by somebody. It was not born that way or anything. And it just depended on who their influence was. And it's very true. You know, if you're born in an environment that teaches you things that are morally not correct, your moral compass is going to be a little bit off. That can be in child abuse, domestic violence. You know, if those things are exposed, drugs and alcohol to children, they can become accepted norms. And then they take on those characteristics, whether consciously or unconsciously. But the real way to, you know, help with it is, you know, racial education. I thought there was a good job happening in the 80s. I'm only 37 right now, but I remember where the programming on television was a lot more diverse. It's like Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street, that represented what the American fabric was supposed to be. And nowadays I can't even watch Fox, not because of the news, but shows like the Cleveland Show, American Dad, things that, you know, when the PJs were taken off of the air because people were like, oh, that's racist. But even though it's created by a Black person about, you know, a satirical format about, you know, impoverished Black people, that people were outraged. But then when shows like American Dad and those things are out, it's nobody, I don't think anybody said anything, at least not that I've seen, but they say some extremely racist things to try to pass it along as just a joke.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Family Guy. I'm thinking of Family Guy when you bring that up. Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Preston, for your comment. And you're right. Like, how do we dismantle these negative ideas? This is exactly what he's talking about. First, we have to recognize it in all of its manifestations. We have to recognize these negative ideas, these negative, these negative mindsets in all of their manifestations, and call them out. You know, call them out and not support them. Call them out, not support them, not give our money to them. I know it sounds like a simple thing to do, but you know, you can't keep giving attention. We cannot keep giving credence to these things. Yeah, and one of the things that Preston said that I think is incredibly important is, how do we dismantle it? Education. Whether people like it or not, unfortunately, whether people like it or not, we live in a day, a time, an era where I am of the mind that certain things need to be required. Like, there should be I think if you go to college, you should have to take some type of cultural competency course. There should be, you know, a re-education of American history, a much more holistic people's history of the, a social history of the United States from the bottom up, from the perspective of the least entitled as opposed to the most, because students are tired of that predictable, erroneous, you know, pretty much racist narrative. They want something new. And I think that we're in a particular time and place to make that something new happen. It looks like we only have maybe like 15, 20 minutes left in this conversation.
Oh, we are over.
So sorry. I thought it was 8:30. Okay, I'm done.
No. I mean, we started a little late. And I was going to say two more minutes and then we wrap up.
Nope, we're done. So we're done. Nope, I'm done. Look, that's me. That's Holly. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I will say this. There are no answers. You know, if you came here expecting, man, she didn't solve racism, I apologize. There are no answers. What is important, what I think is important that all of us, that we all focus on, is continuing a dialogue, continuing a conversation with our friends, our children, our lovers, the people that we hate. It is incumbent upon us as members of a civil society, thoughtful members of a civil society, members of a global world, for us to, speak our truths and to be defensive of those things that we know are right. Try to be patient if you can, breathe when you cannot. And thank you for your time, and I look forward to us maybe having another dialogue in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to my friend. There's all kinds of positive feedback for you, Dr. McGee. If you need a boost, you can look at the chat, and lots of people have sent me personal, like private chats, like, oh my God, these keep getting better and better. Bring her back. Yeah, it's so that's just awesome. We've been doing this. I mean, we do it in person twice a year. I didn't think that we could succeed on a virtual experience doing this, but I had to at least try for my own sanity, because I'm not doing well being a virtual pastor. I miss people. And so I'm just so grateful that people continue to show up. And I would encourage you, if you know people in your life who may not be where you are on this anti-racist journey, that you encourage them to come for these conversations. The beauty of being on Zoom is you can literally sneak in the back door, keep your video off, keep yourself on mute, and just listen. And be open to perspectives that may not be your own. You don't have to agree. You don't even have to understand, but just listening. And this is a really safe way of doing that in the comfort of your own home, with your own kids, with your own pets running around. It's just a pretty awesome way. And we are making a difference. I get feedback all the time from people. So thank you so much, Holly, for taking time out. You're a professor, so you're never really off, but I know this is your summer. And so thank you for being all academic during your summer and sharing your intellect with us. Thank you, Kate, who does not get paid for this, but boy, she works so hard. It's
my joy and pleasure.
I'm so grateful. I did put in the link or in the chat, people asked me about donations to the church privately, and I thought, hey, I'll put it out there publicly just in case anyone else is interested. You know, half the tickets we do, or a chunk of the tickets we do for free, a chunk, we take a donation, any donation, at least $1. And so if you were just so thrilled with this and you want to give a broke church a little bit more, we would greatly appreciate that. And we're just going to keep doing this as long as people keep showing up. We're going to keep having conversations. We're going to get Gordon back. I don't know if you remember, Gordon was a 19-year-old pre-law student at my alma mater, University of Louisville. He's only 19. He was amazing and brilliant. He had me like in tears. We're getting him back to talk to us about what's going on in Louisville with protests and what it's like to be a Black male in this Generation Z. And, you know, with some of the stuff that we're seeing. So we're super, super, super excited about that. That's next week. And yeah, we'll post that soon so you can join us for that. Am I missing anything, Kate?
A couple logistical things. So a few folks have asked if Dr. McGee can share her slides. So I have referenced the YouTube link, but said I would ask you as well.
Sure.
And also our always logistical thing about the chat. If you're on a computer, you can save the chat by clicking in the 3 dots in the bottom right-hand corner and clicking Save Chat. And if you're not on a computer and you want me to save you the chat because you didn't get to write down the names of books or other resources or ideas that were recommended, send me a chat message right now with your email and I'll send it to you when we close. And I'm sorry, Dr. McGee, you were going to respond about sharing your slides and then I kept talking.
No. A quick question. I have the file up. Is it already in there or should I send you the PowerPoint separately?
Yeah, send it to me and then we'll get it out to the participants, much like you did the reading.
Okay. Then I'll send it after we're done here.
Sounds good.
Awesome, right. Awesome. If there's nothing else, thank you all so much for joining. Take care. Have a happy summer. Eat lots of ice cream.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye. Thank you again, Dr. McGee. Thank you.
You are
Kate.
more than welcome. I'll send you an email very shortly.
All right.
Thank y'all. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Thank you. I'm keeping the Zoom on for just a moment so folks can put their emails in the chat to me if they need the chat, and then I'll be closing it down in just 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Kate. It makes me feel so much better when you're on the line.